welcome. You are at the cost sharing webinar, which we have very cheekily subtitled, If You Must, Here Are Important Things to Know.
Okay. And must is specifically italicized because it really is, do you really need to do that? So we'll go through that as we go through.
And so Melissa and I are going to be doing a lot of talking, and I'll let Melissa introduce in just a second. I'm Heather Offhouse. I may have met some of you, may not have met some of you. Looking forward to meeting and interacting with you today. I'm over in the medical school. I'm in the dean's level and in the office of grants. So if you're not from the med school and you have a med school participant on your paths, you're going to come through our office, and we're sort of the med school's last stop before ORSP. And I like to say I've been there since dirt. So you can assign whatever number you'd like to that, but I say since dirt. And I do, for the medical school, watch and help Steve Kunkel, our Chief Scientific Officer or Executive Vice Dean for Research, manage all cost share commitments and manage those kind of things, decide who gets money, and deal with post-award issues in units when maybe post-award didn't quite meet their cost share requirements. So I touch cost share throughout the life cycle. So Melissa.
Yeah, and I'm Melissa. I work in the Office of the Vice President for Research. In my role, I run a cradle to grave operation for the research units under OVPR, but another portion of my responsibilities is cost share via the VPR cost share process, because the VPR does have cost share available, which we'll go into in this presentation. I also deal with, similar to Heather, issues with our units depending on their cost share. Was it met? Was it not? Dealing with those issues that pop up when you're dealing with cost share or match funds. I don't say that I've been here as long as dirt, but I think I've been here as long as the seedlings in the dirt. So between the two of us, we have many, many years of experience at this heralded institution, and we're excited to talk about this topic with you guys today. Next slide. So here are some things that we're going to cover today. It's all around cost share. So what is it? Where do you find it? When do you track it? What happens when you receive an award that has cost share applicable to it? What happens in the year-to-year project management, so AKA the reconciling piece and managing and post-award, and then also what happens at the end of the project. So here we wanted to take the life cycle of a grant and put a bent on it with cost share. So you've probably very similar life cycles of grants are very similar across the board, but how we look at this is at the proposal, we offer commitments. And at that time, they're just commitments because it's a proposal. Then when we receive the award, the commitments that we propose become obligations of the award, and therefore you have to meet your obligations in order to be in compliance with your award. Once the award comes in, the commitment is set up along with the other pieces of the project, so the sponsor side of the project. And then throughout the life of the project, the commitments are fulfilled and they're tracked and managed. And then when it comes to the closeout, it's documentation and reporting of the fulfillment of the obligation / commitment to the sponsor. And that is life cycle. Next slide. I just want to say any and all examples that we give in this presentation are hypothetical. So you may see things that look familiar, but just know that all names and identities have been protected and changed, and this is all hypothetical. So.
Non-auditable, right?
Yeah,
so we
exactly.
had examples that are not true. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So we want to just make sure that we all know that are hypothetical. And if you bring up things that you'd like to talk about, we're going to assume those are hypothetical too. So before we get started, right, in the title we said, if you must. So let's kind of deal with that elephant first in the room. So in the chat box, or if someone wants to come off microphone or off mute, can you start listing some positive things about cost sharing? What do you think are what are positive reasons we do cost sharing, or what is it? Why do we want to be in this business? So give us a couple things in the chat. I'll give you a second to think, because I told you we were going to think in this session. To get the award. That is very succinctly stated, Jackie.
So
Skin in the
the,
game.
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's okay. I like skin in the game. Commitment, more competitive, potentially. I want to be careful about that. Sometimes it helps us supplement. Sylvia, that's great. We're going to talk about that next. Reduce cost. That's a really interesting concept, because I am going to posit that perhaps we still have the same cost. We have to find what pocket to get the money from. Okay, now let's flip the script and talk about what the negatives are. What is problematic with cost sharing? Why do you think we shouldn't cost share, or what can come up and be problematic with cost sharing? If we have all these good things about cost sharing, what are some not so great things? Too frequently done, has to be tracked, and it's auditable. Yeah, it's a commitment we have to track, and it's auditable. It's a pain. Jackie, you're like way on top of things today. That's good. Jane Coffee, thank you for pointing out, it can reduce our IDC rate. So for every, and I think it's around 4 million that we do of cost sharing, we actually reduce our indirect cost rate negotiated rate. So that's a complex thing. We're not going to actually get to that today, Jane, but it does actually impact our F&A rate. So thank you for bringing that up. Consequences of failing to meet the commitment. And then, Anita, thank you. Why are we using money from the university, tax dollars and tuition dollars and other clinical income dollars to support some external entity's project? And that could be industry, who's a for-profit. Time management of communications within deadlines. Yep, indeed, trying to get through the system and get everything done. So definitely there is a love-hate relationship with cost share. Mm-hmm. I don't know how else to describe it. This is one of those things that it clearly has those. We have math today. Again, more thinking. Here's the first formula. When a PI wants to do cost sharing, and there's a capital C, capital S cost share, which means we have to track it. There's also a lowercase c, lowercase s cost share, which means we are making a commitment to the sponsor and we have to live up to that obligation. And I'll use, med school has a lot of NIH projects. Use a typical RFA, say we have one in nephrology where we want to put in a great proposal. The sponsor, NIH, has said this RFA says you can request up to $800,000 a year. Now, if the PI proposes this much work, which will cost this much money, but we're only getting this much from the sponsor, whether we say anything to NIH or not, we are doing some sort of institutional investment in that project in order to make it happen. So we have a lot of times that we're doing cost share that we're not even tracking. So anytime the project costs more to do than the sponsor is giving us, we are doing institutional investment, whether we're tracking it or not. And so I would say probably, because not every project works out well, but probably it's somewhere in the 70% range, or you can guess what it would be for your own unit. You're finding that you have to find institutional commitments within the department or the unit, division, whatever level, to make up the rest of the cost of the project. So I'm going to share that I think you're doing cost share whether you know it or not, right? And it's whenever we spend more than the sponsor is willing to give us. So that's a very brief place to start. I'm going to call this lower C, lower S cost sharing. So Melissa.
Yeah, and so when you're dealing with sponsors, they use terms and common terms that they use is institutional support, institutional commitment, matching funds, various machinations depending on your sponsor. When dealing with these matching funds, it's usually that is a big C, big S cost share. That is a match that has to be met. The sponsor will drive that, what they're looking for there. When you're dealing a lot of times with institutional support or institutional commitment, that does not always equal a specific dollar value. right? Like Heather just said, there's the cost, there's the total project cost, and then there's the sponsor driven cost. And like she said, we could be doing cost share because we're picking up the cost at an institutional level, but it's not necessarily a big C, big S cost share. When dealing with this, sometimes your faculty will come to you already with a predetermined idea that I am going to do X, or this is my X dollar amount, and they come to you and you then have to fit it inside of what we would view as a cost share. But always have conversations with your faculty about this. If it's not, read your RFAs and solicitations clearly and talk through with them, is it a true dollar amount that you're looking to cover, or is it that you need the institution to support you because you know that the work is going to take more than what the sponsor will provide? So keep that in mind. Anything you want to add there, Heather?
If I could come in. So sometimes institutional support and institutional commitment, which is listed in your RFA or your RFP, request for proposal, sorry, didn't mean to use acronyms too fast, but in that language, it might say we are looking for institutional support or we are looking for institutional commitment. That doesn't have to be a dollar amount. And I think that's something that is hard for faculty to get their heads around sometimes. So if you can offer them suggestions about strategic initiatives at the University of Michigan and say, we are investing intentionally in this scientific area, whether that be opioids, right? We have a new center for opioids. If you can show that the institution has it as part of their strategic priority to invest in an area, that could meet the sponsor's requirement of demonstrating institutional support or institutional commitment. And so often faculty see this and they see dollar signs. As a research administrator, you may want to help sort of expand that exploration, especially if dollars are not extremely easy to find. So you can still make a case for how Michigan is strongly supporting them through either cores we've established, access to different materials, making sure pathways are set. Things like that you can describe from a grantsmanship perspective that can help address institutional support and commitment before you ever touch dollars of cost share.
Right.
I know I'm speaking from Pollyanna world because we all know that when they have something in mind, we're going to go for it. But I just want to make sure that you know that there are other options and even grantsmanship that you can expand.
So next we're going to transition is where can you find or try to find partners to help support the project? Next slide.
And we're going to tell you that it depends, right? I love the word it depends. It is my favorite term. It applies here. And I've waited like 9 whole slides to use it, or 11. It depends because there are different drivers for different partners to cost share. And understanding that can really help you prepare your faculty to have conversations about cost sharing, know who to approach on campus. We're going to make the case that an internal partner that is willing to help cost share is no different than an external sponsor. They are driven by these things on the card where there's any kind of match, which we've talked about already. Most are looking for multidisciplinary ways to invest, right? It doesn't impact just one individual, it impacts many individuals. It might have to do with prestige of the organization. So if by getting this funded, we will elevate Michigan's stature and reputation, that could have a huge impact on the decision whether or not to participate in cost sharing. Lots of times on the left, we have to do it anyway. Right. So back to that idea of institutional investment, if we know that we're proposing a scope that costs more money than the sponsor is willing to offer, we know we're going to be doing some cost sharing in order to make that project whole. So that may be a reason to cost share. So all of these drivers to participate, each partner that you approach, because some projects approach 6 and 7 different units or offices to ask for cost sharing, some approach one. But each one might be driven by a different ideal behind that ask. And so it's really important to understand who you're asking for what And so what are units looking for? It depends. The med school, we're very interested at the dean's level that all parties are present in the cost sharing, right? So if it's a department that is asking us to cost share and no one else is participating in that cost share, we're looking for, I think someone had in the chat, skin in the game. So if we don't see other people's skin in the game, we question why we should be involved. So to us, as an example, having everyone at the table is important. Regardless of who that is. And it may be at different levels or different amounts, but at least we know that they're willing to contribute to the whole. And since each unit might have a different strategy, you could get different answers, right? So while it could be the most appealing thing to one unit, it could be very not attractive to another. And so sometimes you have to kind of work that together. It is really no different than approaching other sponsors. So Melissa, you want to take us through OVPR as a case study?
Yeah, you may or may not know, but OVPR does support cost share institutionally wide based on submissions to us. So when I linked out the website here, you can read about it more, and I'll go into a little bit more of the process. But when we're looking at requests that we receive, very similarly to what Heather just said, we look at, does the project align with the overall institution and strategic goals or strategies? We want to see more than one school, college, or unit participating. It's interdisciplinary science. We look for both unit and school college support there. If it's an infrastructure related, so this would be an equipment or facility renovation, something along those lines, again, benefiting more than one school, college, or unit. Institutional prestige or reputation, is it a very special solicitation that if it was awarded to us, it would really put us ahead of the game? You think about artificial intelligence, that's something that's very hot right now. We will take that into account when we look at it. We also consider the unit's resources. Is there a true need for this? And we take all of these things into account when we review our request for cost share. There's more details on the website linked here. The requirements there are a little bit more expanded, and so you can understand them a little bit more. Next slide, please. So just like all the units, we have requirements to request cost share from us, just like sponsors. So view OVPR as an internal sponsor with cost share. So we have documents that are required to submit. We have a cost share request form, which is on the website linked on the previous slide. We want to see the total budget. So we expect the budget to be final by the time it gets to us. We want to see the project abstract or a description of the project. We want to see via an attachment, email, all of the school, college, and unit approval so that all parties, so by the time the request comes to us, all other parties have agreed to support the project overall. And then if required, any draft letters of support that would require the VPR signature. Our process is we use InfoReady for these requests, but it is at a level that is a little bit different. So we expect that the research associate dean or their delegates submit the request into InfoReady at least 3 weeks prior to the sponsor due date. We maintain a list of the delegates so we know who has them. Like Heather is I'm going to say it, Heather's office is the delegate for the medical school. And similarly, I don't know if Rick Wintergurst is on this call, but for COE, it's Rick Wintergurst. So oftentimes it's your dean's office who is the one that will help get it through to the finish line in InfoReady. Work with your school, college to see how they want the information presented to you so that they can put it in InfoReady, and work with your dean's office on that. Next slide. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I will say, like if you're from the med school, we actually do some due diligence before we will go and approach OVPR for funds. And so I want to share that while Melissa's listed out all of their requirements, your school or college may be doing some work before you get to them, because we're looking at what other requests we've made that particular year. We're looking at the impact. Melissa mentioned I have to be the one to actually submit all of this on behalf of someone from the medical school. So I'm even looking at whether we think that there's a chance it will get funded, because it is a lot of time and effort and back and forth to take care of this. So we're looking at whether it seems reasonable, and we may go back to a team and talk about, we see this in your proposal, but we think you can bolster your proposal in this way. And so we try to help the grantsmanship, again, even in the ask internally, before it goes to OVPR for consideration.
Thank you. I just wanted to call out that on the previous slide, we say we expect the request a minimum of 3 weeks before the sponsor due date. We understand that that can't always happen, but we want you to be aware that once they're received, if it's out of that 3 weeks, it may or may not, it will be given a lower priority as far as the review. So just an FYI there. Yeah, Davina, you're right. Getting faculty to adhere to the deadlines. Yeah, we know. Well, research administration deadlines are the bane of our existence sometimes, right? And, OVPR has our own deadlines, but that being said, we do make every effort possible to process every request that's received. So what will happen in the system is once it's reviewed in InfoReady, the requester, who again is the RAD and/or their delegate, it is most often a delegate, not the faculty doing this. So just an FYI. A response will come through the InfoReady system. It'll either be a thumbs up, we say yes, or a thumbs down, we say we can't support this at this time. If it is a positive response, we look to see that the path is updated with the OVPR cost share. We'll give the department ID at the time, and then that the OVPR cost share request form is appended to the path, as well as the approval from InfoReady. Once we see those things on the path, we will approve it, and then the project can go along its merry way, and we wish it its best success in being funded. We do have an email group that's linked on this slide. If you have any questions regarding the cost share process or cost share requests, that is our group email. Please be advised that depending on the question, we may have to push back and send you to your school college to make sure that you're following the way that the school college wants the cost share to be handled. That's very rare in all honesty, but just I wanted to call that out as an FYI. All right, and next slide.
We've kind of covered the concept of cost sharing, the fact that there's institutional investment in some projects. We've covered how to work with campus partners, specifically campus. We're about to head into some very specific U of M type things. But before we go there, does anyone have any questions so far? You're welcome to come off microphone or stick it in chat of anything we've covered so far, just in case. Or observations, or you want to say, this is how we do it over in School of Public Health, Lauren. I don't know. Okay. I just want to make sure. And we're happy to take questions. Just stick them in chat or come off mute and we'll find you. So you found someone to invest. Now what, right? Having partners agree is a great feeling, but there is now tons of due diligence that have to happen. And so we have 4 to start with before you even approach, I'm going to say, a PAF form. You need to make sure that what everyone's agreed to cover is actually an allowable cost. If the sponsor does not allow the type of expenditure that you are asking for cost sharing for, you cannot actually cost share it, right? You can have an institutional commitment internally to get funds to help pay for it, but if the sponsor doesn't allow it, cost share, official cost share tracking cannot allow it. It can't be used as match on another project that already exists. Okay, so if 2 months ago you put in a proposal and it got funded, nothing gets funded in 2 months, but you know the idea. It got funded and it has a match requirement and you're already using the money to match against that award, you cannot double count it against another award. There are creative ways you can mention the cost sharing in your proposal by saying we already have access to XYZ and that will benefit our program, but you can't actually cost share something that is already committed to someone else. And then you have to take some time to figure out how to represent it internally. And we're going to spend a lot of slides talking about that. So I'm going to leave it at that for now, because sometimes you have to figure out if it needs to be tracked or not. And so most of the next definitions and kind of tools that we have to share are related to that idea of, do I have to track it? Do I not have to track it? Things like that. So Melissa's going to start us with some definitions.
So yeah, when we're looking at cost share, we bucket it in mandatory versus voluntary. And so mandatory, it's relatively clear. It's required by the sponsor as condition of eligibility or of receiving an award. So read your solicitations, your RFPs very closely for this, because sometimes there's Easter eggs in there where you don't expect them when it comes to a mandatory requirement. When we get in, then we get into the aspect of voluntary. So this is offered by the applicant, but it's not required by the sponsor. So we are deciding to cost share on a project. And we deal with the big C and the little c. And so when we look at voluntary committed, big C, this is offered in the proposal and we've committed it and budgeted as part of the award. We have referenced hard dollars in our proposal that we will be committing towards over and above the sponsor as part of this project. Voluntary uncommitted, this is not necessarily a quantifiable figure in your proposal. It's anything beyond that which is committed and budgeted for in the award. So there is a little, you get into splitting hairs sometimes with this, but when it's uncommitted, I tend to think of it as not a hard dollar figure. That may not be right across the board. That's my personal interpretation. Voluntary committed is a hard dollar. That's what will be held to in the award if it's awarded. Examples of voluntary committed could be faculty effort. We will support up to 10% over and above what's in the budget of the award for faculty X. Voluntary uncommitted could be something along the lines of I can't think of a really good example off the top of my head, but we will provide the resource, the support available for the project to run. And we're not saying specifically what that is, but that we are going to make sure that the project will be successful. And this could be the ways that we do it. Anything that you want to add in there, Heather, that maybe I didn't?
I think you have it, and I think it'll come out some more in the next couple slides.
Yeah, so we took the definitions and then built a table. So, we have on the far left, I don't know, on the one side, cost sharing. So does the sponsor require it or does the sponsor not require it? And so if we quantify it, that is, we start talking dollar figures somewhere in the proposal. If the sponsor requires it, we quantify it, it's mandatory commitment. It's pretty simple there. When its sponsor requires it, you almost always quantify it. But if the sponsor does not require it, here's where you quantify it. Like I said, there's a dollar figure mentioned. It's a voluntary commitment. And if we don't put a hard quantification on it, then that's where it falls into the voluntary and it's not tracked. This is just mandatory and voluntary. We'll get into third party here in a few minutes. So I know that's another aspect of cost share.
Yeah, and so we're going to take that a little bit further. And so if you think about the University of Michigan environment, anything that falls in that quantified column, whether it was mandatory or voluntary, then has to be tracked and reported on. Okay, and so they think that's one thing that's hard, because in your request for proposal, if the sponsor lined out that you must commit certain funds or have a 3-to-1 match or a 1-to-1 match, whatever it is, that makes sense on why you have to track it, keep in that balance, and we'll look at some math in a minute, all through the life of the project. I think it's harder sometimes to talk with teams about this voluntary commitment because they said, well, I just offered to do this, so I shouldn't have to keep doing it. But the problem is once it's quantified, and talk a little bit about the word quantified. Melissa talked about hard dollar amounts. Percent of effort is a quantification. right? So because percent of effort can become dollars, because it's dollars, it's then quantified. So just make sure that you're aware, even if the sponsor didn't require it, if we offered it up as the University of Michigan, then we must follow it. So that is our tracked column. This bottom right hand, I like people to live here because you don't have to track it. So, Melissa said we were trying to think of examples, but if you have a project we've had individuals write into their justification, we've asked for X number of dollars from the sponsor for animal care costs. Any animal care costs above this amount, we will provide. We don't know how much that is. It could be $1, it could be $0, it could be $10,000. And that's why it's not quantified. So therefore, since it's non-quantified and the sponsor didn't require us to do it, it is voluntary. And you do not have to track it with a dollar commitment in post-award. So we like it when people live in the circle. We didn't really talk about this open box here because if the sponsor is going to ask for it, you're going to quantify it. So it doesn't really exist to have a non-quantified sponsor requirement usually. So when we talk about how to capture it, if you think about, if you're on the pre-award side, on the PAF form, the proposal approval form, there is the details of cost share. And that is where this column is going to go. The details of cost share. The voluntary part that we don't have to track, you do still put it on the PAF. So if in the proposal you're promising something to the sponsor, which I'll also say is a promise to your investigator and their team, because we're all signing off on it and agreeing to have that proposal run that way, you're going to put it in the other institutional commitments. And that way it's on there. You can assign a DEPT ID to it. That department can agree to make that commitment and everyone's on the same page. So that's important to do. And then the big thing to remember is that your PAF should always reflect what you're telling the sponsor. Okay, so if you've told the sponsor about it, it needs to be on your PAF. Okay, so it seems like this is just like a side education and PAF filling out, but it is true, especially for cost share, because you want to make sure you keep those commitments aware. Any questions on this chart? Because the next thing you're going to do is you have to take polls, and I just want to make sure you're ready for the quiz. So good on this chart. Any questions?
I would just like to reinforce, like you said, be careful of what you ask for. We had a situation where when I was working in SBH, and when we were preparing for a proposal, the faculty member kept because they were getting funds from other departments, kept referring to it, and actually put a table together showing how much she was getting from each department. And we kept trying to steer her towards not doing that, because like you were saying, because it got submitted that way, it was considered cost share. And so then she was like, well, I want to spend this. And we had to say, well, you can't, because it's now that we have to adhere to the sponsor requirements and they won't let you spend on these categories. So we actually had to go back and get it removed as cost share, which we were able to do, but it could all have been avoided had it not been put in the initial proposal that way.
Yeah. Davina, thank you for sharing that hypothetical example. I do think it's true that often we intend to convey one thing to the sponsor, and there are other ways to do it. But your example absolutely shows that once you document it in the agreement, one of the reasons I reached out to Melissa and asked her to do this with me is because we looked at something together a while ago, because it was like, nope, it's in the proposal. It has to be cost sharing. You can't, unless you work with the sponsor, which we'll get to, you can't get out of it. We start with the space of, we said it, we're obligated to it. So that's the interpretation at Michigan, which is what I think most institutions use. If you propose it, you're obligated. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, Melissa, why don't you?
All right. This is our first poll question, and the Navigate team will get this set up, but I'll read through it. So written into the proposal is a statement that the department will provide 10% effort for the PI and provide any additional supply costs not in the budget. So are these items mandatory commitments, voluntary commitments, or I need more information? And
Okay. I think I've just
Did it.
launched the poll.
you did.
We'll give you a couple minutes to, or we'll look for at least half of the people responding. So you're under obligation to participate. And there can be many answers sometimes. I often say it's like watching the poll is like watching popcorn. Like when the answers start slowing down, like popcorn in the microwave, you want to hit the button. Okay, you're on your last 10 seconds. And if you're not sure, just pick one. We'll talk through all three. Because interestingly, we're seeing kind of some split. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. I'm going to share the results so you can see what it looks like. Huh. What do you know? What do you think?
So this one is, it depends answer. So, you know, we said earlier, when we talk about percent of effort, that's backed up with figures. That's a dollar figures, 10% of whatever their salary is. And provide any additional supplies in the budget I'm not in the budget. What is that? I mean, what does that mean? The supply cost not in the budget. Does it mean that there's no supplies in the budget at all? Or is it over and above what the budget will allow? This one, I would definitely kick off a conversation with my faculty and partners to try and better understand what they're doing. But part of, to me, Heather, just chime over if I got any of this wrong, but to me, the 10% effort is a commitment. That's a mandatory, a voluntary commitment. Let me rephrase it that way. It could be mandatory based on the solicitation, but in most cases, it's voluntary because we're deciding that we're gonna support the true cost that the faculty member needs to devote to the project. And there may be a reason why you can't put the full effort required on the project. The additional supply costs not in the budget, that could be more information. I need more information. What are you thinking there? What is the plan of attack, and how are we going to represent that to the sponsor?
My interpretation is the same as you, Melissa. Definitely in this sentence, we have commitments. I personally would vote, I need more information, right? Mm-hmm. Because I don't know if it was originally in the request for proposal from the sponsor or not. If it was in the request for proposal that the PI must have 10% effort and the institution must provide that, then it would totally be a mandatory commitment. Like Melissa, likely the sponsor probably didn't say that, or they might have said you have to have a one-to-one match, in which case it could be mandatory, but it could be also a voluntary commitment. So I think you have to have more information to know what kind of commitment, but it's definitely a commitment. So it was a little tricky to give you the first question to be it depends, but the first question was it depends. I promise the rest of the polls are much more straightforward. So I'm going to launch this one, but we're going to stick with the same scenario, same 10% effort, same commitment to provide any additional supply costs. Now, the question is, how do you put that on the path? What is the appropriate way to document that? Do you use other UM commitments for both the effort and supplies? Do you use details for the effort and other UM commitment for the supplies? Or neither has a value, so you don't put anything on the path? Okay, so I'm going to launch. And again, give you a minute or two to think. Oh, you all are doing very well so far. Keep those answers coming in. We're starting to get to the same participation level as the last one. If we scared you off, it's okay. There's, this is a safe space. We don't know how you voted, so it's okay. Okay, almost to the 80% point. I'm gonna end the poll. Some of you are still sneaking in under the wire. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Okay, so you can see a vast majority of you picked B. I think you can see it. Not if you can see the poll. Yeah, okay. B is correct. It is that the effort, because effort equals dollars and dollars are tracked, effort does go in the detail of cost sharing. The additional supply costs, any additional supply costs, which is not quantified, but is still a commitment to both that project team and the sponsor, then a unit would sign off and say that they were committing that in other commitments. For the couple of you who chose C, neither has a value. When you get this recording, you have to rewind a little and watch again because there is a value related to effort. And also because that effort has a value related to it, any dollars or effort is how you should think about that tracking of details of U of M commitments. So I'm going to hopefully stop sharing and you're back on the slides. Any questions there on either of the examples, or do you want to unpack anything now that you've heard sort of the explanations, or thumbs up, all is okay so far? I got a thumbs up from Delyn, thank you. Davina, do you have a thumbs up or a question? Oh, a thumbs up, okay. I know, I never get my Zoom reactions right. Okay, well, seeing nothing in the chat, because again, you're welcome to put things in the chat or come off mic. I'm gonna flip to the next.
Yeah. So we wanted to talk about cost share from other sources. So we've talked about the two main, the voluntary and the mandatory types of cost share, but there's other ways that cost share is viewed at this institution and probably in other places. So I wanted to go through this table a little bit. These are common examples. It's just an example list, and this is a suggestion of how you would handle it on the path at the time. So we have third-party contribution. So this is external to the institution. Another party is contributing towards the project, a project partner. It could be quantified or not quantified. But whenever we're dealing with third-party contributions, we want to make sure if it's represented to the sponsor, it's also represented in our proposal and our path. And we list this as a non-UM commitment. And we recommend that you make sure that you have something from that third party that is the appropriate institutional individual for that entity that they have signed off on the commitment, because it could get very hairy canary at closeout if for some reason you didn't have that, right? Think about it that way. In some rare cases, you can leverage another sponsored project. This typically happens in the non-federal realm of when we're looking at this type of option. I personally haven't had this experience this very much. It's to me, it's rare, but it does happen. So this is something that you would describe in the proposal, but you wouldn't necessarily have it as a cost share line on the part of the path where you list out the details of cost share. We suggest that you put it in the budget notes section so that everybody is aware of what you're doing. You want to cite the existing project grants, verify that the project that you're going to be using will allow for this, verify the existing dates encompass the proposed commitment period. There are, when you look at cap salary or over an allowed cap that the sponsor provides, we describe that, but we don't mention it on the path. This is common business practice here. There's a defined way that specifically when we look at salary caps, there's a very defined way that we handle it here at the institution. And it's typically used for salary and tuition, and there could be other caps that a sponsor puts into their solicitation. We also have agreements between the units, or what I call sweetheart deals. They're not always sweetheart deals, but that's usually how I think of them. It's optional to put in a description, but we do list that under an option in the cost share panel called internal U of M commitments. It's not required to list, but it's good practice to capture it based on your school, college way of doing business and based on what the agreement could be. So just keep that in mind.
It does help with memory loss.
Yeah.
So it's a great place to store it because it will route the path to them. They can agree to it. And then 3 years later, when they don't remember the sweetheart deal, you can say, oh, no, look here. So it is good for memory loss if that happens. We did have a question come in, Melissa, that I'm going to talk a little bit about before we go on to the next section, which is about specifically training grants or T32s. Well, I guess it could be any training grant. I speak NIH, sorry, T32. And so there's a difference between PI effort, faculty mentors, and then maybe consultants. And so I will tell you what we're looking for at the med school. And if anybody wants to kick in from ORSP and say, yep, for them too, we're looking in the program plan. And in the program plan of a training grant, you define who the PI is, what their administrative structure is, and you list how much effort they have. And so at the point you represent in a proposal that the effort is specific to that project, and you list a % of effort that you are not recovering in the budget, we'll ask some follow-up questions, whether it's covered by institutional training support dollars. In the case that it's not, we will expect cost sharing on the path. So either we'll make a budget note to say the PI's effort is covered by the institutional training costs, or we will have them cost share that % of effort. Institutional training costs are rather limited. So if you see a project plan that's 10% for the PI and 5% for the assistant director and 5% for the other assistant director, you're not going to make that fit. So we're going to be looking for cost share. So there's that. Then there is also mentors. So mentors on a project, especially in a training relationship, the project is there to provide trainee support. The mentor, we allow at the medical school to list very specific language. They can't just say 5% effort, because that sounds like it's dedicated and specific to that project. So that would be cost sharing. But if they say 5% mentoring effort concurrent with ongoing research, so as a byproduct of doing my other research grant, I can also train this trainee and represent it that way to the sponsor. We will not make them cost share, because it is, I think when we talk about leveraging another sponsored project or leveraging departmental costs, things like that, it's because the training is incidental to work they're already doing. But it has to be very specific to say 5% mentoring effort concurrent with ongoing research. Now, I've just shared all that from the medical school perspective. I don't want to indicate that that is what all schools and colleges do. So I want to say, be sure you talk to your school and college about what they expect to have happen. While we do it one way and we're comfortable with the way we do it, and we have already looked at the risk related to it, that doesn't mean all schools and colleges do it the same way. So I want to be very careful about that. So let's see. I did get a side question. It came into me directly, which said, can you amend a path once it's submitted to then add an internal commitment? That is not one of the reasons we do a revised path on campus. So I'm going to say no to that. But if you wanted it documented in the path, I'd be all for getting it done by email and uploading it as a posted comment so it's on the record. So I don't want to violate why we do a revised path, unless if we told the sponsor about it and now we're revised, we have to change it, then that's a revised path. But if we're doing these other internal U of M commitments that are sweetheart deals, as Melissa called them, we want to be sure that we're honoring the revised path policy and only doing it by a posted comment.
Okay. I just want to say, Amanda from our ORSP, thank you, said that ORSP expects to see training grant cost share on the path if it's quantified. So she agrees wholeheartedly with Heather's explanation of how the medical school views it. I will say that I have experience with training grants in other schools and colleges, and it is similarly handled in the other schools and colleges as well.
Great. Okay, any other questions before we leave the PAF world? Because now fast forward a couple months, if I can get my cursor to work, you have an award. Woo! Everybody celebrate. When the award comes in, now we are bound. If you remember that slide at the very beginning where Melissa talked about the fact that first we propose the commitment, when we accept the award, we are obligated to that commitment. So we're going to talk a little bit. First thing you need to know is what happens in ERPM. In ERPM, some things live in the proposal neighborhood, and when they get awarded, they move to the award neighborhood. But that does not mean all of the details move with it. Okay, so some of your information stays on the PAF and does not forward to the award. So we wanted to share some information, kind of like insider, so you know. If it's in the details of cost share on the PAF, it is going to appear on your award record. Okay. If it's an other commitment or an internal U of M agreement, it is forever going to live on the PAF. It is not going to carry forward to your award. So if that's the case and you need to track those things that are on your PAF or remember they're there, you want to keep notes in your award record, and there's ways you can do that through the terms and conditions tab. You can upload notes to yourself or whoever might be working on the project to indicate there are some commitments back on the PAF that you want to keep track of. That doesn't mean you can ignore them. We are still liable for those commitments. So if we've promised the sponsor and the project team that that unit will provide any additional supply costs and they come knocking on the door for supply costs, we need to make sure we're meeting that commitment. So it could lead to a conversation later that we have to make good on. If you're leveraging another project, you might want to make sure that that one stays awarded so that you can leverage it. So those are things that you have to watch and make sure that you're keeping them clean and separate and accounted for. So there's your kind of heads up on PAF versus award neighborhood information.
So, you have an award, and what is the new award going to be held to? What is the project going to be held to? So we oftentimes we don't get the exact amount that we ask for, right? The sponsors don't, if you have that rare case where you get every dollar you ask for, I want to come work for you guys because what are you doing right? So like if I never had to deal with a budget reduction again, I'd be very happy. But so when you have a quantifiable cost share and you need to match it, the award amount changes. So the total award is recalculated via an adjustment, and then we're held proportionate to the cost share, so proportionate to the sponsor expenditure. So keep that in mind. Next slide. So here is how we're trying to show you the math. So you have your proposed cost share and your sponsor proposed budget equals the recalculated match over the total sponsor expenditures. So stay proportionate through the life of the award. So this is something to really keep in mind when you're managing and monitoring your awards. So when we say proportionate, we want to make sure that we're also, you have your sponsor expenditures and you also have your cost share expenditures, and you're trying to keep those as balanced and proportionate as possible. Keeping in mind with whatever award changes happen throughout the life of your project.
And it's especially important to remember that this proportion does not change when there's a match requirement. So whether it's 1-to-1 or 3-to-1, it will always remain that balanced proportion through the end, no matter what's expended. Most of our projects don't have a match requirement, but either the sponsor required something or we threw something on the table, right? And when we threw it on the table, it became a commitment that was voluntary but required to track. You need to know that the university has taken the position that if the sponsor awards at least 80% of what you proposed, you are held to the same cost share. Oh, look at Jane gave me side eye. So it stays proportionate. So it could be a new balance. So if you committed, I tried to do a little bit of math to get these pies to work. They're not very drastically different, so you have to kind of squint, but the right-hand pie is actually a larger percent of the pie than the left-hand pie. So if you have an investigator on a large-scale project that is putting in for $1 million award and they have $300,000 in cost sharing, the award comes in 10 months later, because we've all forgotten what happened 10 months ago, and it got cut by the sponsor, because that happens a lot, and now they're getting $850,000, which is more than 80% of what we asked for. Our commitment is still $300,000. And so you need to know that at time of award, this is very important. When it's not a required match where it stays proportionate, we are still, if the sponsor funds at least 80% of what we proposed, we are still bound by the same cost share. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do something about it, and we'll come back to that, but you need to know that's how the math works, right? More math. We love math. So you can see in this picture that the numerator in both cases is the proposed cost share amount, even though the denominator is changing. And so I suppose you could have it the inverse way where the sponsor gave us more than we asked for, but how often does that happen? Most of the time, the sponsor is giving us less than what's asked. So often our Y% of cost share is higher than the original X%. So back on the screenshot on match, it's the same percentage. Now we've got an imbalance in cost share. The math is, if you do nothing during the life of your project, the math is going to start at closeout with the Y%, the expectation that you meet that. So does that make sense to everybody from a math? Even though I got a little side eye, the math makes sense? Okay. We're going to give you up.
What do you do? So in the example that Heather just gave, you're still held to what was originally proposed because we were awarded 80% or more of what we requested. You can always consider approaching the sponsor to change the cost share as part of the award execution. And when we say required cost share, that could be mandatory or voluntary, but that is what we mean, that whenever you have a committed cost share, I'm going to say 99.9% of the time, there could be the rare exception, the sponsor must okay a change in your cost share. And sometimes it can be difficult, especially when we're dealing with voluntary committed cost share, to get the sponsor to look at that, because they sometimes may not want to, I don't know, I'm going down a tangent here, but it can take a long time for them to review it. In a hypothetical world, I have been dealing with an issue with getting the National Institutes of Health to respond to a cost share reduction on a voluntary match. And it's taking a very long time in my hypothetical example. There are times where you'll get an award acceptance request or an AAR. So this is prior to the award being fully activated. Usually this is for a budgetary change of greater than 80% of what was been awarded, and you need to recalculate your budget. If that is the case, recalculate your cost share at the same time, and think about that at this point. Don't just leave your cost share alone when you're looking at your total budget in this case, because this can help you in the closeout. You can clarify and or change your cost share at this stage. You still might need sponsor approval to change your cost share, so keep that in mind. But this will really clarify and help it close out. And don't forget to include any documentation at this stage if you're looking at making a change.
Add to that, Melissa? So with cost share, it's important to get it right-sized and tracked to the right amount as soon as possible in the process. And so for some sponsors, say industry, where you're going back and forth and negotiating a contract, this could happen at the AAR stage. I just want to acknowledge the fact that sometimes we get awards from sponsors and they're issued to us. Once that award notice is issued, you don't have the option of the AAR anymore, even if it's around the time of award. And so we'll talk about using the award change request in a minute, but you can use and try to say, whenever you have a significant reduction of your award from your proposed one, you should be working with your project teams in areas other than cost sharing, talking about whether their scope is changing, if their significant aims are changing and they need to go back to the sponsor for that, in addition to the budget. So there is an opportunity during that conversation to reevaluate your cost share. And so we just wanted to make sure you knew that the AAR, which you could reach out to your project rep at ORSP and say, I'm engaging the sponsor in talking about our cost share, so that they know that that conversation is happening. And then if there are adjustments to be made, they have ways on their end to start routing that AAR for a change of cost share. But like Melissa said, it's going to require a conversation with the sponsor, regardless whether you have it on day 0 before the award is executed or day 372 right at the end of your project. I know that's a little longer than a year, but that was intentional. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're thinking about how to work through these and get the documentation done.
So, yeah, thank you, Heather. So in post-award, you've got your award and it's all set up and you're starting to monitor it or manage it as you normally would. All of the same activities that you would do in a typical sponsored project, and reviewing and reconciling the account, monitoring your expenses, make the typical projections or forecasting for the faculty on the spend, and then collect your revenue. So that is one aspect of cost share, is the revenue is not going to automatically come into your cost share on your project. This is, you have to work with your partners who have agreed to the cost share amounts, and you have to work with them to collect your revenue. Keep in mind that schools and colleges will have their own ways that they want you to work with them to collect the revenue. So make sure that you talk to your business partners that have agreed on that. And my thing is, don't wait to the end to collect your revenue. And just be careful as to, you know, how you're collecting it, because if you collect a revenue that you don't end up using, it is expected to be given back to the partners. Okay, so but that is like down the line and part of the closeout process potentially. Sponsor programs does provide a cost share analysis with the FSR. We'll have an example of that in just a second. But you are responsible, you as the research administrator, to do the math in between. You're not going to get an annual cost share analysis from sponsor programs, as you know, on the regular. So make sure that you're managing it and you're doing the math. Mine is all in kind, third party. Yeah, so they're third party. So yeah, with that, you have to make sure that your third party is doing what they're supposed to do, and you won't necessarily have to do all of the things listed on this slide, but keep that in mind. But make sure that when you're looking at this, many of your awards are multiple years long, so you'll have multiple years of cost share potentially. And you don't want a surprise at closeout, because it could mean a deobligation or a shortfall that has to be covered because the cost share commitment wasn't met. And keep that in mind. Next slide. So indirect costs on cost share. So we know on the path, indirect costs are there and we put them in, and we can call them imputed indirect costs. Should I be factoring in my indirect cost in post-award? Yes, the recommended is yes. You want to get credit for the totality of your expense. But just keep in mind that our reporting systems do not show indirect costs on the cost share. So if you're looking at M reports, you'll have the sponsor side above and the cost share below, the 20,000 or 25,000 fund, and then the 10,000 fund below. And you will not see indirect costs present in M reports on the cost share. So that is something that you will have to do on the side in your supplemental system, that you may need to do on the side to compute that aspect of your cost share. As Heather said, cost share should be treated like the sponsor side, and you would remove things like equipment and from your indirect cost calculation. So keep that in mind. Remember, there is a cost of supporting the research and, quote, paying ourselves for the use of our lights, the water, the building, the things that our indirect cost covers. So that's why we recommend looking at it that way. Anything you wanted to add there, Heather?
you guys as research administrators, right? We're foregoing, whenever we cost share, we are foregoing that part that helps support the institution as well as foregoing the part that supports the research. And I think that's something that is sometimes lost on project teams. And so kind of reminding of that, keeping track of it, because especially in a match situation where it benefits you to track that amount. But again, it's hard sometimes to kind of convey the full cost of research. So when we get into the project itself, or we've gotten past the award notice, right, we do have the option of opening up these conversations again, as I mentioned before, to resolve things before we get to closeout. And the mechanism to do that, one, is to talk to your sponsor, check in with them. It may require you going through the project reps at ORSP if it's required to have an institutional official communicate that information. But it could, if it's, say, an industry sponsor, you may be talking to that industry partner because they're not looking for that level of institutional authority. Open up a conversation. Once you have an understanding of what that cost share new kind of stake in the ground is, you want to make sure you're processing an ACR, an award change request, right away. Our memories, maybe it's just me, but sometimes the memories get a little foggy. So if you work out a deal and you get an understanding with the sponsor and you do not document it right away, you could end up at closeout not having that on the books. And if it's not on the books, it doesn't count. So you want to make sure that you're always on top of this. The ACR can be used to request a mod be issued, a modification to your award be issued that recognizes this quote unquote new understanding of cost sharing that your sponsor has agreed to. So it will definitely help to be proactive. And, you know, Melissa mentioned that sometimes we have these projects. If you don't have annual FSRs where you're seeing your cost share report on an annual basis, hypothetically, I may have had a project that went 5 years before there was a required financial report. And now we were trying to backtrack, hypothetically, and take care of all of that back cost sharing and reaccount for the project. And we actually ended up not using all the sponsor funds because we had not met our cost share commitment. So in the rebalance we talked about, costs had to move over to the university side to meet our commitment, which meant the sponsor liability was lower. So a project team who was being very conservative in their spending and attacking their project in a different way, so they had enough sponsor funds, didn't remove the cost share commitment from the university side. So an ACR is the perfect way to address that throughout the life of the project as the understanding changes. Okay.
Ian, you have a question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes. So it's not a question. It's related to the adjusting of indirect costs and cost sharing as things go along. We recently had a hypothetical where our original imputed was 100%. We didn't have any exclusions. We ended up getting approval to use some of that for our equipment. And at the end, it became apparent that we needed to have requested ORSP approval to reduce our imputed indirect cost commitment, which we had never considered. But that's something to keep in mind, that if you do change what you do and you suddenly are buying equipment or using your indirects, your cost sharing for tuition subcontracts, that you want to get official approval to reduce the imputed so that your FSR isn't unexpectedly scary.
Right.
I like the word scary at the end there. Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up, because rebudgeting on the university side is the same as rebudgeting for the sponsor, right? When you do that rebudget activity, you have to relook at how your modified direct costs are being handled and what that does for your F&A. So thank you for bringing that up. As we get into this poll, which we'll talk about, sometimes how you list it on the path can work in your benefit at closeout and working with sponsored programs. If you remember, we had that example before where a faculty member had 10% effort cost shared. It's estimated to be worth $23,000. And let's say in the proposal, though, we didn't put down the amount, we only put down the percent of effort. which option between A and B has more clarity at time of closeout for that support? Would you more likely choose A, supportive effort, $23,000? Or would you choose B, Dr. K will have 10% effort and fringe, it's worth about $23,000. So A or B. Sometimes we like to be vague. Okay. Give you a little bit more time. I could tell you all are thinking. Okay. Almost there in the popcorn. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share those results. Okay, so a majority of you chose the second one, which is the more specified. It's hard to say that word in the afternoon. Specific reference to what was in the proposal. Those of you who chose A, is anybody brave enough to come off mute and say why you chose A? You have to be really brave.
Sure. This is Jackie.
Thanks, Jackie.
Hey, yeah, because what if their salary costs increase?
Okay.
I mean, they're not going to decrease, I don't think.
We hope they don't, but they could, right? And I'll talk a little bit why they might. So yeah, sometimes being vague is helpful in a proposal. I would say internally on a path, we want you to be as specific as possible so that at closeout, you can point back to it and say, here's what the intent was, and I'm meeting the intent. Now, you know that some sponsors allow you to decrease effort, or the cost might go up and down, as Jackie, you mentioned. So when you think about it, if you say $23,000 worth of cost sharing, but let's say the 10% effort and fringe, say their fringes dropped 1 year, or they were on their spouses or significant others plan and their fringes dropped. That effort plus fringe, we might have provided 10% effort and fringe, but it might not have come up to 23,000. So I would say being more specific can be helpful because you're capturing the intent, and that will help the conversation at closeout. I do think too, there's oftentimes sponsors allow us to decrease effort. So we might be able to show that we accomplished the work with 8% effort, which might be within that sponsor's allowance for handling effort treatment. And if that's the case, you can make a case to sponsored programs that you still met your commitment. So I would personally be more specific. Doesn't mean that A is wrong. It just means you could have more trouble later. You'll end up pulling more information out of the proposal to have that conversation. Okay, last poll of the day, promise. Now we're applying to NSF for on an MRI application, and they've justified a spectrometer, which is equipment worth $150,000. We just happen to know that. $75,000 is in the budget to NSF, and we state that U of M will provide the rest of the cost. Right, so we've said that what the cost is, we've said we'll provide half. On the path detail of UM cost share, which option is better for clarity in post-award? Again, A or B? I like watching that little, I don't think on your end you can see the little lines going up and down, but I'm watching them go up and down. We're about halfway there. Keep guessing. And I swear this is your last test of the day. We're not going to make you use more brain cells after this. Okay, it's starting to slow down. It's interesting. Okay, I ended the poll. I'm going to share the results. Again, a majority on choice B, probably following from the last discussion that more detail is good. 50% of the spectrometer, which we estimate at $75,000. So if that spectrometer cost goes down, we could make a case for cost sharing less. If that spectrometer cost goes up, we could be on the hook for more potentially. So that's something to watch because you have that variability. But again, support of equipment, we've not been specific on the path. So we might have to work with sponsored programs to pull out certain sections of the application to walk through the details, because maybe they were looking for 3 pieces of equipment to be cost shared, coming up to $75,000. So I think it's really important to make sure that you're specific, because if you don't want to cost share other things. Let's see. The other information there would be to take a look at that and make sure that you're clear on what it is so that you're capturing it for post-award.
Right.
I'm going to stop sharing there. I think I've cleared it out and we're back on slides. Okay. Melissa, I think we're going to go to you.
Yeah.
We're closing out. We're ready to close.
Yeah, we're getting to the finish line of your project that has cost share. And so what happens next? So this is an example of a snippet of an FSR that has cost share on it with a cost share analysis. So an FSR financial status report driven by sponsored programs will be turned over to you. If your project has cost share, it will have this cost share analysis embedded in it. So we're going to step through how to read this. For those of us that are not accountants, this sometimes is a little bit difficult to understand. I have to stare at it every time I get one and jog my memory as to what is actually happening here. So if you look at this, and it's in this example, we were authorized a sponsor budget of $99,808 with a cost share commitment of $63,124. Our total there would be $162,932, and the cost share represents 38% of the total, the cost share and the sponsor expenses. So that's our total. Anyway, the actual expenses, which is the secondary table, is looking. So the actual expenses on the sponsor side was $85,000, which is lower than what we were awarded. So we spent less than what we were awarded, which I totally mess this up. So I do this every time. Those of you that have taken Navigate with me, welcome to a repeat of Melissa at Navigate, who gets confused with this table every single time. So basically what they're saying here is $85,000 of the expenses was used, which is 85% of the total authorization. When we add in the cost share and the sponsor expenses, we get to $139,000. Then sponsor program says, well, we were supposed to cost share 38% of the award. And so the cost, so then the cost share is requested is reduced down to $54,000. If you have the expenditures and have met that, then your cost share is essentially met. If you did not meet that figure, then you've got an issue of rebalancing between the sponsor expenses and the cost share. So Heather mentioned this happening before in her hypothetical example, where the cost share was lower than the sponsor side, and they then move expenses or move expenditures from the sponsor side onto the cost share to meet the cost share commitment, because we are held to our cost share commitment. So keep that in mind. Usually this page will, if you have an issue, you're going to have a lot of conversations with your sponsored programs representative and reporting representative, and you may have to do a lot of administrative work to untie this or to get corrections made if there is a big issue at this stage. But you're very late in the game at this, if you get to this stage and you're at the closeout and you realize that there's a problem, it might be too late. And that's why we recommend being proactive and monitoring your cost share along with everything else at the same, at the same clip, and making sure that everything is delineated and spelled out as best as you can.
I don't know how I found an example where we underspent a project, because like Melissa said, how often does that happen? But what happens in this cost sharing analysis, for those of you who've seen a cost sharing analysis page before, after this analysis at the bottom, it says cost sharing met or cost sharing not met.
Yes, thank you.
In this
Yep.
case, this particular one says cost sharing met. And if I were the research administrator looking at this cost sharing, I'd be engaging sponsored programs, because if I have met my commitment by more than I needed to, and my sponsor side is underspent, I need to be looking at whether I can move some costs the opposite direction from cost share to the sponsor.
Yeah, you're right.
Because
Thank
why
you.
would we want to spend more university money than we have to, right? So this would be a good example of one where we might want to engage to move those costs the other direction over to the sponsor side.
Yeah.
So something to
I've
keep-
never had that. Yeah, I've never had that experience in my
Right.
career. It's almost always the other way. So, but Heather makes a very good point, because you do want to utilize the sponsor money and help the institution there. So
it's a bi-directional road, but you do have to engage in that conversation, because once your cost share says met and they've given you that report, then they're not looking to make changes to that unless you engage them and request that. So let's see, I guess I lost control of my thing again. Okay, this is the big one. You get to close out, you haven't met your cost share commitment. The number one thing we hear over and over is the sponsor doesn't care. And you know what? As an institution, we don't care that the sponsor doesn't care. It's a little confusing. But if we proposed it and they accepted our proposal, we were obligated and we managed it, and now we were closing out, whether they say they care or not, we have to meet that obligation until they let us off the hook. So at the end of this is the most common thing, and I think, Melissa, it's kind of tied into that hypothetical example you shared about going to NIH and they haven't responded. They may not have responded because they don't care. Could be busy, could be that they just don't want to acknowledge the fact that we have cost share, because under uniform guidance, we've gotten this far without saying the words uniform guidance. Under uniform guidance, federal sponsors do not expect and should not expect cost sharing. So we are offering things up that they should not be asking for. And by offering it up, they're just saying, you did it, not me, right? So even when you say the sponsor doesn't care, or the sponsor wants me to be able to spend all their money, they don't care how much University of Michigan did, you have to go back and ask for confirmation. It has to be from an appropriate person. Whoever, if it's a contract, whoever legally signed their contract, the same division unit at their organization needs to be the one to tell you that it's okay. And again, you're back to filing an ACR. Now, if you've done everything in the last, 40 or so slides, you shouldn't be doing this at closeout. But
right.
This is the most common time we hear the comment, the sponsor doesn't care, why do I have to do it? And it's because we committed it, we became obligated, we track it. That's part of our good fiscal practices. So you need to know that is the university wants to make sure that we are following those. So sponsor might not care. You still have to get them to care enough to tell you they don't care. How's that? So this is it.
Yeah. So go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, so this is it. So we just wanted to highlight what we've just discussed over the last 45 slides. Cost share is only one way to show institutional commitment to the project. So keep that in mind, that there are other ways to show the institutional support, and it gets into grantsmanship and some creativity in some cases, but it doesn't always mean that you have to have a quantifiable figure when you're looking at how the little C cost share that Heather has mentioned, right? That institutional support and commitment.
And I think if nothing else, we've proven in 40 slides that cost share means administrative burden, right? And you may not be able to solve that, but just we want to acknowledge that, because we know that even though it is the PI's responsibility to put the proposal together and uphold what's in the proposal, you all as research administrators are helping them execute that valiantly. And so it is administrative burden to keep it, track it, report on it, come back and make changes to it. Whatever we've talked about today, that's all administrative burden.
Quantification, if it's the one thing you really take away from this, especially if you're focused on pre-award, quantification matters so much. If you, hypothetical situation, I've had to untangle very messy situations where way too much was quantified and was not intended to be quantified necessarily. The intent was to show the institutional commitment, but not in a quantifiable manner. And so what I mean by that is like, we're going to give you the additional support needed from the office, but we're not going to tell us for X person at X amount of time, but you're going to be able to have everything that you need in order to run this program. Right. And so just really keep that in mind and advise your faculty on what it means when they quantify something, because the quantification is the commitment turns into the obligation. Right.
The last two go together. Be proactive. Don't wait until the end of the project. Nobody wants, it'll slow down your closeout process. It'll slow down your FSRs going out. You don't want to wait until that point. So we're going to ask you to share your tips. So start thinking about your best thought. Maybe use your hand or come off mic, and we'd love to hear what you think about cost share. I'm sure there's going to be an evaluation that comes out, so please be sure to complete that. And we're glad you're here. So I'm going to stop sharing and say we have 3 minutes to talk about anything you'd like to talk about in addition to what we've covered. Oh, Raquel popped into the chat, the webinar evaluation. So click on that and pop out to that too. Anything you want to go back over, anything you want to share, any hypothetical situations we lop off the end of the video, anything like that. And I think, Melissa, you're okay if people contact you, if they have some follow-up questions. I'm okay with that. We're in the book, you can find us. But
I always say, when in doubt, reach out.
Nikki, question, hopefully, for the cost share that is not quantifiable. So kind of as far as you said that we don't have to track it, but we need to make a note in the award. Can you kind of go over that again? I'm not really clear what that.
You don't have to, so let me clarify that. So if you have something that you've put into the other commitments because it was not quantified in your proposal, it will forever live on the path and does not automatically port forward to your award. There is an ERPM, little known secret. If you go to the Terms and Conditions tab in ERPM, there is a way for units to enter their own information about what they want to make sure they're keeping track of and monitoring on that award. And so if you want to make it easier to find, you could take that information that lives on the path and you could post it to the unit information under your terms and conditions. Is it called terms and conditions? What's the right? I have to look up the right.
I think it's called special terms and conditions.
Special terms and conditions, something like that. But you will find an activity where you can add information on that page.
Yep.
And once you add it there, that means you can keep track of it on that award without having to keep a separate shadow system or a shadow file on it. You can just refer back to that list of things you want to keep track of, whether that's, cost share or reporting or whatever it is you want to keep track of. You can put things in there to help you manage the award.
And I think, Nikki, also, if it's something that's referenced in the proposal and it's not quantified and it's not trackable, you could still have a situation where the sponsor wants to know, you stated that you were going to get this. So we want to see, what that means. They could, it's within their realm of an audit perspective that they could do that, which is why we're suggesting using that special terms and conditions tab to keep track. And then you can say, okay, this is exactly what it was for. Let's go back and prepare the response that we need if the sponsor does ask the question. So it's helpful.
And Lynn has posted the link to the ITS job aid. on documentation. Thank you, Lynn, for doing that. That was really helpful. So if folks want to pull that down real quick, it'll explain how you can store your own information on the award record.
Okay, well, we're right at time. If there's no more questions, like Heather said, please feel free if you think of anything after this presentation, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you all.